So, what is Tunnel Talk? I'm Noah Rosenfield, and I am a game designer, and I'm working on my third game called Tunnel. We're right at the beginning, we're just starting out. And so, as a way to sort of share the development process with people who might be interested, other developers, designers, players, it seemed like this was a really good way to do that rather than a devlog, maybe a little more interactive, and hopefully will allow me to stay on top of it a little better since it won't be thinking about my words so much, which is what I do when I'm writing. So, why are we doing this? Yeah, really, it's a rare opportunity that you necessarily have a game where you're starting out really fresh. A lot of times, by the time people start up a devlog, the game is already pretty well into the process. And so you don't necessarily see a lot of those early design decisions and those factors that go into taking this kernel of an idea into a first prototype, into further builds, and so on. And again, the design considerations that go into each of that. So hopefully, this will kind of reveal some of that for you and be useful for you in designing your own games, deciding if you want to get into game design, game development, and all of that. And of course, for players who are interested in the game as it develops, this should give you a first look at what we're going to be doing and testing and the direction that the game is going. So, where did Tunnel start? Um, the core constraints for Tunnel, right? We had a couple of design pillars that we were working around. And number one was going to be accessibility. We wanted this game to have a single input. That was it. The user was just going to be able to hit one button or, for because we're going to be targeting mobile as well, just a screen tap. That is the only user interaction that they're going to really get. And, that should be really good from an accessibility standpoint in terms of cross-platform, keyboard mapping to just a single input, so no matter what kind of accessibility concerns we have in terms of that, that'll be covered. So we can have a really great, easy to jump into experience, wide audience, and all of that. And that's actually it's really quite hard to design an interesting game systems where the user really only can do one thing. So truly, it came out mostly of that single constraint. And the idea that we had from there was sort of so what I do is systems first design. I don't start with narrative. I don't start with an aesthetic. I really start with a system that I think is going to be interesting for the player to engage with and go from there. And so, what this early system looked like is this. Um, since the user is only going to have a single input, uh, the actual movement of their avatar was going to need to be automated in some way. And so the way that this is working here is we've got a forward progress through a level that is automated. The player will always move forward. And so then from there, it becomes about path selection of which way do I want to go? Which way is the player choosing to take their forward progression? And so this kind of developed into this idea where sort of like an old school helicopter game where the player's always moving forward, or a Flappy Bird, right? And the only thing that you can do is kind of tap, and that controls your up and down motion. And now a lot of that is just based around, bouncing your character, keeping it going, avoiding the items that are on the screen there. Um, and it was much less about strategy than it is about just pure reaction time and being able to to hit this. So what we did next was we also wanted to um, incorporate some kind of strategic elements. um, and so let's see. Okay, so we move from this idea of having this player avatar, which is automatically moving through our level, and the player, in order to have something that they're fighting against, that forward progress needs to come with some kind of a cost associated with it. And in this case, what we've done is we've kind of taken the idea of a force field that is, as you move through the level, the force field protects you from your surroundings, which are constantly, in conflict with your forward progress. Um, and the shield, as you move through, degrades. So you can picture this as sort of, and initially this was the initial aesthetic, the initial idea was sort of tunneling. That you would be moving through the earth, and as you go down through the rock, the dirt, that you are busy having to drill through, that as you erode away this pathway through the rock, your shield mechanism that is allowing you to do this, it also slowly goes down, like any kind of a meter or whatever, your stamina, whatever it is. Now, when we combine this decreasing meter with forward progress through the level, what we end up with is this pathway that is going to get thinner and thinner as the player moves forward, their shield erodes, and they're leaving this kind of snaking S trail. Um, and so, with that, we now have this sort of inevitable movement of the player towards an endpoint, right? It starts out as this wide trail, it gets narrower and narrower, it eventually comes to a point, and that is sort of this moment where we now have an end to this the setup. The setup of the player moving forward, left and right, shield degrading. It will continue naturally on its own, untouched, until it hits this point. And so now we can start to work with that system. So now, how do we allow the player to keep going? Well, their shield needs to obviously increase in size again. And so by adding in some kind of mechanism, power up, that allows them to boost their shield back up and keep going. Well, now we have something where the tunnel can, so this is where starting this side, going down, right? This is what this looks like as the user hits the power up here, this power up box. The shield, boom, back up to an increase in size, followed by, again, the S curve slowly tapering down. And so now you have this sort of balanced system where the user is getting the shield, moving their way through, it contracts, they have options that they can go for to try to re-enable, get their shield back up to size to allow them to make more forward progress. So this is where this system of constant forward movement, and the shape of the player's movement, that also comes out of the constraint of the one-touch control. In order to allow the player to have some actual decision making, there needs to be, you know, something that they're choosing about. And essentially, we have this two-axis movement. One of the axes is sort of fixed, and that is across the x-axis, back and forth. The player, much like any of the sort of reaction time style games where, a meter is filling, or a block is sliding into place and you need to time that tap, that interaction to be exactly at the right spot. We're sort of borrowing that idea. And so we have that automated x-axis movement. We actually have automated y-axis movement as well, because otherwise the player is just sitting in one spot the whole time. And so what we're really allowing them to do is just make a forward boost by tapping the screen. And when we do that, that is how we allow the player to affect what that tunnel looks like and how they're able to try to time the movement of their ship, of their, of their avatar, um, to the actual construction of the level. Um, and so that was sort of the core ideas that go into the making of Tunnel, and where it is at this point in time. Um, so from that, initially uh, the initial aesthetic was, sort of, we were thinking about digging, drilling through, through this level and having the user sort of create their own level design as they're going. Um, and I guess, what's an important aspect of this that I sort of haven't addressed yet is what happens when you play the level again. And so that is sort of where this starts to get a little bit more interesting. You have this pathway where the user player has removed a portion of the level through their previous play. And by doing that, when they play again, if they're placed in, if their previous progress stays, it now builds where, okay, yes, the user now is going to have a pathway where they can kind of sit inside of and stay safe, because that piece of the, you know the the shield erosion or whatever, that won't be occurring anymore because they're inside of this little safe space that they've already carved out in a previous run. Um, so that is this other key element where, in collecting the power-ups on your first run through, secondary run-throughs get more difficult because those power-ups are no longer available for collection on your second run through. However, they also balance and get maybe a little bit easier if you can manage to stay within your own trail. Theoretically, no matter whether or not you collect any power-ups at all, if you manage to retrace your own steps, by the time you get back to where you died on the first run, you should have more shield left over than you did on the first run, because you'll have been staying safe within this sort of, this cone, um, throughout the whole time. And eventually you're going to then, when, as your larger shield is encountering places in the tunnel where you, on your previous run, had a lower health, lower shield health, it will again sort of scrape away the sides, widen the tunnel as on each run through. You're going to be kind of widening this tunnel, should you choose to stay in the same path, or you can go off on your own and start carving an entirely new path. So that's another important aspect, which ties into what we're sort of jumping into our next round of tests, and what we're looking at for where this gameplay is going to go. So what did the prototype look like? I have the prototype up in another video. You can click here to check it out. You can see what the actual gameplay looked like, and we'll do a future episode where we talk a little bit about how that prototype was built. It took 48 hours to kind of just throw it together, and that's like over the course of 2 days, not actually 48 hours of work. And so we can, kind of take a look into that another time, give you a sense of how you might, how did we problem solve to get ourselves from zero to a prototype to test out this idea as quickly as possible. And we can show you the construction of that actual project another time, another episode. This is just, just want to catch everybody up to speed where we are with the project. So what was learned through this prototype, right? That's the big question. Is we built this prototype to try to test out this general idea of a game system where the player has a shield that carves out the level. The shield contracts as they go by carving out the level. There's a balance there between my health and the path that I leave. They have the ability to re-up their health by catching these power-ups. And we've started to throw in as well some mines in order to give the player things that they need to avoid and make this more of an active experience. If the only thing that you're doing is just going for power ups, well, there's not a whole lot to do. It feels actually a little bit stale. But at the point that you have to start actively trying to avoid things within your limited control structure, what we end up with is this experience that takes planning, reaction time, sort of forward calculation of your movement, and you know, and things like that, and the strategy around, do I get this shield now, do I collect as many as I can on each run, do I leave shields for my later runs, how is this going to go, and as well as sort of what is the end point for the game, right? We kind of need to give that user more than just like a go forever kind of thing. You can do that certainly, but is that the most compelling way to play, or is there actually some kind of a better way that we will give a user goal? Essentially, what is the user goal? The things that we learned from playing, it's really hard actually to time it to hit the shields, quite difficult. And hitting the mines was quite easy. Is if you're not actively working to avoid them, even with this randomly generated level that we produced, it really was quite simple to, if you just let it run, which again, this is another great thing about it. We can kind of just start the simulation and let it run. Since there is this automated movement component, the game can play itself. And only through the user interacting does the performance of our automated character actually improve. And we tested this out to see, like, okay, how many runs, what was the average number of runs it would take the ship to clear the level if we just let it run itself and we didn't touch it. Ended up being, for the level that we'd constructed, it took about 15 runs. And, if you didn't, when you were as a user actually playing through, the play time, I think was probably around in the 3 minute mark. That's how much active play it required, or 1 to 3 minute mark. That was how much active play was required to get from the top of the level to the bottom of the level. And to do that, it took about 14 unassisted runs to just kind of clear this path. The ship is hitting shields, hitting mines, willy nilly without any sort of a strategy involved. And just through the sheer fact that it's leaving this pathway of safety after each run, inevitably, by the end of it, the ship, even without user input, will clear the level. And so that kind of gives us a gauge for how difficult the level is on its own, like what has been generated, how many mines there are, how many shields there are, the placement, how tough is it? And it was tough. It was tough. The frequency that we had was pretty good. The Yeah, it was really hard to time hitting the shields. It was very easy to accidentally hit the mines, um, and we started to kind of get to see the interplay between the relationship between shield size and shield collection and mine avoidance. Right, the larger your shield is, the easier it is to collect other shields, the harder it is to avoid the mines. And so there's another balance point here where if if making your shield bigger is going to expose you to hitting more mines, well, there's a trade-off of, if I collect a shield and it gives me a +2 health, and I hit a mine and it gives me a -3. Well, collecting the shield for the +2, now that I'm more likely to hit a mine, is that actually advantageous? I could end up going for a shield that boosts me up, which also results in me hitting a mine that I otherwise would not have. And as a result, I'll end up with a net -1 health on my shield. And so there's another secondary system coming into play that's sort of the balance of the size of my shield, what it collects, and how much damage I'll take during that process. The actual control itself was a little bit frustrating, because the player has such a limited input, insofar as the only thing I can do is hit my spacebar to boost myself forward, and use that path adjustment to either collect or avoid. I felt like the control was too loose. It wasn't tight enough, because there is really just this single point of input. As a player, since I'm so limited, I feel like I need to be really able to control this one point very well. Um, and so that's something that we're going to be testing out, is how do we give the user better control over that, over the boosting, and ultimately over the shape of the pathway that they are making. Um, so we are going to be, it should be possible, we think, to allow the player to go in a perfectly straight line. And that's one of the questions. One of the next questions we want to solve here is is it fun? Is it fun if the player is able to, with perfect timing, be able to direct their ship in just an entirely straight capacity through the level? Um, or is that too easy? Does it offer too much control? And in fact, what we'll need is some kind of a system to, sort of like a stamina system, where the user is maybe only able to make direct forward progress, through the level without any of the left right motion, only maybe a certain number of times, and or they'll need to be collecting sort of other items to help boost that stamina, so that they're able to maintain a single trajectory rather than a boost followed, with a cooldown period, before they're able to then boost again. Um, and so that is where we're at right now. And so we've been working on taking this prototype, which is really just a real quick, we threw these things together, very quickly. And as a result, tweaking the elements of the system that we want to, in order to discover what our next piece of this experience is. That sort of needs to have a more robust system in place, so that we're easily able to tweak the frequency, the size, the damage of the mines, of the shields, how much health they're coming in. We want to be able to add in new power ups for people to collect, other items. We uh, we want to be able to, tweak the actual level itself, whether or not we want this to be entirely randomly generated, or can we sort of pre-make actual level designs to create certain experiences, certain, portions in the level where the user has to do, certain maneuvers, and as opposed to just a purely randomly generated level. And so that's what we've been working on. We've been working on tweaking, sort of building out these systems to allow us to uh, easily load levels, save levels, generate levels, adjust the shield, how fast it degrades on its own, the size, the general appearance as well. And the level itself, tweaking parameters for the size and, size of the hit areas for mines, shields, and things like that. So um, that is our current status. That's where we're at with this game. And actually, what I should say, one of the most exciting things that we've seen, and we saw this from the prototype with players immediately latching onto this, is the fact that you are the game is designed around replaying a level that has been previously played. And now, whether that previous play is coming from you, where you're looking to retrace your own steps, or if it's coming from another player where you're looking to either retrace their steps or potentially go off on your own, you leverage their progress while also applying your own strategy, so that you can sort of make different decisions and potentially outrun them on their own level. You know, so that was something that people immediately grabbed onto. Definitely, I think is going to be one of the big, uh, the most interesting pieces of this prototyping experience is how do players play this game together. I can already see a bunch of ways that this could happen as terms of like sending challenges to, sending a level that you've started to your friend and then they keep going with it, they send it back to you, you're cooperatively working together to try to get through. Obviously it easily could be easily competitive as just in terms of who can get further on this, on this level, who can get the further run. um, and I think, in that cooperative sense, something even more structured where you are able to form a squadron of your friends where, there'll be a lineup of who's going to go first, second, third, fourth, however many people are in your squadron. You have this sort of lineup of players who are going to make this attempt at this run. And obviously, once a player has successfully completed it, if your first player that in your squad manages to make the run successfully, leave a trail all the way to the end of the level that everyone else can then follow, well, assuming that you have the precision to do so, there is an automatic sort of a win that every player following can have. And so, it tests that ability to, make the decisions on the first run that leave a successful tunnel. It tests the ability to, follow in those footsteps as well as improvise when inevitably you end up off track. And can you get yourself back into the lane, to make that? Or does player two make their own lane, carve out more of the level to make it even easier for the fourth players? So I think that there's a really going to be some really interesting multiplayer dynamics here as well. So thank you for watching. This has been Tunnel Talk. Looking forward to comments. Let us know what you think of the game, what you think of the prototype, and questions you want answered. We're here to, to sort of give as much insight into the design and development process behind Tunnel as we can. So again, I'm Noah. This has been Tunnel Talk. Thanks very much for watching. Peace.